Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you and God's mercy. Welcome to this session on the Qur'an 101, in which we'll take an introduction to the noble Qur'an. And we'll begin by asking a very straightforward question, which is, what is the Qur'an? Right? What is the Qur'an? And we know the obvious answer that, the Qur'an is the sacred text of Islam. But what is the reality of the Qur'an? The Qur'an itself expresses this in the opening chapter. The Qur'an is arranged in 114 chapters of varying lengths. The opening chapter, which is called the opening, Al-Fatiha, begins with praise of God, right? And just as a footnote here, of course, the word Allah is simply the Arabic name for God. God being the one worthy of worship. So it is not a particular God named Allah, but rather the name of God in Arabic is Allah, and it is used both by Muslims and also by Christians and others as well. So it begins with praise of God, and then there is a call made by the believer. Right? And that call expresses the most urgent human need. And that urgent human need is the need for guidance. The need for guidance. In the 6th verse, after praise of God in the opening verses, the servant says, Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Guide us, O Lord, to the straight path. Guide us to the straight path, right? And what is the straight path? It is the way of attaining unto God's pleasure, the way of securing the good of this life and the good of the hereafter, right? So this is the call of the one yearning for God, and there's an immediate divine response, because right after the opening chapter closes, and the opening chapter is rather brief, it's only 7 verses, and that was the 6th verse. In the opening of the 2nd chapter is the immediate divine response. God Almighty says there, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Alif Lam Mim, this is the book in which there is no doubt. And what is it? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It is a guidance for the mindful. It is a guidance for those mindful of God. And those mindful of God are of 2 levels. There are those who've attained unto a level of mindfulness, of piety, of righteousness. And this term, the mindful, also encompasses those sincerely striving to be of those who are mindful believers, righteous believers, believers who are pious, who love God, and who strive for the good. And what is the Qur'an? It is a guidance. It shows the way. It shows the straight path, the path of uprightness to the attainment of piety and those qualities that are beloved to God, and through which one becomes a servant who is guided, who finds the good of this life and the good of the next. So the purpose of the Qur'an is to show us the way to God, and to describe the way of characterizing oneself with those traits that are pleasing to God and that enable the sincere seeker to attain both to the good of this life and the good of the hereafter. And another way of looking at what the Qur'an is to look at a classical definition of the Qur'an, right? Because the scholars in the various disciplines of Islam would pay particular attention to defining terms and concepts, and they define the Qur'an for us. What is the Qur'an? The Qur'an is defined as being the speech of God, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, through the angel Gabriel, as guidance to humanity to seek the good, to seek God and to attain unto the good of this life and the next. There's a little typo there, I'm sorry. So as guidance for humanity to seek God and to attain unto the good of this life and the next. Let's look at the component parts, right? Because these help us appreciate what the Qur'an is. The first aspect of the definition of the Qur'an is that the Qur'an is the speech of God. The Qur'an is the address of God to His creation. And as we will see in some verses coming up, this is a tremendous event, right? The fact that God, who is the creator of all things, the sustainer of all things, right? Because our understanding of God is that God is not only the one who created everything, but He is the one who sustains everything at every moment. Only God has absolute existence and reality. The existence and reality of everything else is derived and dependent, right? And it is God who is sustaining things, right? Now, God addresses His creation, particularly those whom He has made morally responsible. And this address could have been direct without an intermediary, right? But it would have been unbearable, right, in its tremendousness. So God chose that this address of His be revealed through the medium of a book, right? So we read the Qur'an, we recite the Qur'an, we consider this to be our action, right? So we consider the Qur'an insofar as it is what we do, right? But that is not really the most significant reality for the believer of understanding and awareness with respect to the Qur'an. Rather, it is the speech of God, that when the believer is reciting the Qur'an, they hold and understand that the reality is that this is God addressing them, right? So it is the speech of God, right? And it is in that sense that it is said that the Qur'an is eternal, right? Because speech is an attribute of God, right? So it is the speech of God. And the significance here is that for the believer, right, when they read the Qur'an, this is God's direct address to them. And God chose that this speech be expressed through the medium of a book that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And this act of revelation is what makes someone a prophet, right? A prophet in the Islamic tradition is defined as being an honored servant of God whom God chose to grant direct revelation, right? And that revelation was sometimes, took the form of books that those prophets compiled, and we believe in the great biblical prophets. But this revelation is something that is unique to prophets, and the final prophet sent by God is the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And this revelation took place through the angel Gabriel, right? The angel Gabriel, who's mentioned in the biblical tradition as well, is the angel of revelation. He's the one who conveys God's messages to the prophets, right? And the prophets, of course, have direct inspiration from the divine and even direct revelation. But the Qur'an came through the angel Gabriel, right? And what is the function of this book? It is guidance for humanity. Right? It is guidance for humanity. What is guidance? Guidance is to show the way. The way to what? Right? As guidance for humanity, to seek the pleasure of God. Right? This is the concern. Right? This is the concern. We want to seek the pleasure of God, to be of those who truly love God and who are themselves beloved to God, who express their thankfulness to God in the ways that are pleasing to God, right? Out of a sense of thankfulness for the blessings that God has bestowed us. The very blessing of life is a gift from God, right? At every moment we are indebted to God for the gift of life. And in pursuit of human interest as individuals, as families, as communities, as societies, as humanity, as God's creation, to seek the good for ourselves and for others, the good of this life and the good of the next. Right? So this is what we understand the Qur'an to be. And the why a believer takes the Qur'an so seriously is that this is the divine address, right? The Qur'an is the address of God to us, right? And in that sense, it is something that is tremendous. One has a sense of reverent awe and also of overflowing love for this book. And there's beautiful verses in the 59th chapter related to the power of the Qur'an, and they also express the central theme of the Qur'an, which is belief in God. In verse 21 onwards, Allah Most High says, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. Had we sent down this Qur'an upon a mountain, you would have seen it humbled and crumble from the awe of God. These are examples we give to people that perhaps they will reflect. And then Allah Most High tells us, هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو. He is God. There is no God but Him. عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. The knower of the unseen and the manifest. He is all merciful, most kind. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. He is God. There is no God but Him. He is the King, the pure, the peace, the bestower of faith, the watchful, the exalted, the compeller, the supreme. Exalted is God above all that they ascribe with Him. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى. He is God, the creator, the inventor, the fashioner. To Him belong the most beautiful names. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Him, and He is the exalted and wise. So these were verses 21 to 24 of the 59th chapter. And here God is describing Himself to us, and the Qur'an is the address of that God that is the creator of all things, the one who fashioned everything, the one who has the most beautiful names and attributes, who is characterized by every attribute of perfection. Everything besides Him is both created by Him and is being sustained by Him at every moment. And this glorifying that the creation is engaged in, the heavens and the earth glorify God. This is an intrinsic glorification of the fact that they are His creation and that they are signs of God, and that at every moment they're being sustained by Him, right? And therefore in this is a reminder for those who are morally responsible that they have a responsibility before God, that God chose that human beings be morally responsible, right? On the basis of God making them responsible. And what are they responsible for? They're responsible for the guidance that God has given them in the Qur'an, which is that one seek His pleasure in this life, that one worship Him as He has commanded, that one seek the good for oneself and for others, that one avoid harming oneself and one avoid harming others, right? And this is why we understand divine guidance to be both an expression of divine mercy and a means to becoming people who embody mercy. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is addressed in the Qur'an that وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that we have not sent you except as a mercy to all creation. And this is not just a mercy to the believers, nor just mercy to humanity, but mercy to all creation. Why? Because mercy is sincere concern for the good and the spreading of that concern, right? That's what mercy is, right? It's this deep felt concern that one has, that one strives to spread. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, I am but a gift of mercy, right? And he told us that it is only the merciful who are granted mercy by the All-Merciful. Be merciful to all that is on earth, and the Lord of the heavens will then be merciful to you, right? So this is at the heart of the teachings of the Qur'an. Now, how do we hold, and why do we hold that the Qur'an is the word of God? It is because of what in Arabic is referred to as i'jaz, the inimitability of the Qur'an, right? The Qur'an is understood to be inimitable in style, right? The linguistic and rhetoric power of the Qur'an is inimitable, and there's a divine challenge in the Qur'an itself, asking them to initially to produce a chapter like the Qur'an, or even a few verses like the Qur'an in eloquence and rhetoric power, let alone in meaning and in teachings and the guidance they contain and the benefit they facilitate in this life and the next. And this challenge was unmet, and there's a divine promise that this challenge will never be fulfilled, that no one will be able to produce a work as eloquent as the Qur'an. And this is something that one should take upon oneself to try to discover. So this is, and for believers, this is part of what gives us this sense of conviction, right, about the Qur'an. And with that, there's a divine promise that God will preserve the Qur'an, that the Qur'an, unlike previous scriptures, will not be changed. And this is one of the amazing things about the Qur'an, that the Qur'an has come to us through mass transmission. During the lifetime of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, thousands of people memorized the Qur'an, and they spread out across the lands. And Islam spread during the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and in the generation immediately after, it had already spread to the westernmost parts of Africa and into Central Asia, and people had memorized it and written it in all these places. And from then till now, not a word of the Qur'an has changed, right? Not a word of the Qur'an has changed. We have it now in text and also through contiguous transmission without any interruption, through it, people memorizing it as well from east to west without any changes in it. And this is part of the amazing nature of the Qur'an as the final guidance from God. And we'll be sharing some readings related to this that you can follow up on as well. And what is the purpose of the Qur'an? Right? What is the purpose? This is the final part of that definition, right? To seek the pleasure of God and to attain unto the good of this life and the next. The central themes of the Qur'an are that the Qur'an tells us about God, about his nature, his attributes, his actions. Secondly, it tells us about the way of guidance, what God calls us to in this life and what God calls us to seek with respect to the hereafter, right? To rush to those things that will make us be deserving of God's favor and to become of those of paradise. And this guidance has consequences, right? Those who accept the guidance are granted eternal reward, and those who reject it bear the consequences, right? Although what exactly entails rejection is something that is left to the grace of God. It is left to the grace of God. And this teaching was not left as merely theoretical, right? We don't just have a book that tells us about virtue and about stories that from past prophets and others that contain examples and metaphors for us, but the virtues of the Qur'an as it was being revealed were manifest in the person and example of the one who was described as being the living Qur'an, right? The one who was described as being the living Qur'an, our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. God Almighty describes him in the Qur'an in the 68th surah in verse 4, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that verily, O Prophet, you have tremendous character. The character of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, his conduct, the way he was, is described not merely as being good nor excellent, but rather it is described as being tremendous. And actually, literally in Arabic, it's not simply that you have tremendous character, but it is you are upon tremendous character. And this is something that even the enemies of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, during his lifetime acknowledged. One of the leading members of one of the tribal leaders of Mecca, who were opposing the Prophet, complained to the Emperor of Rome in his presence about the Prophet. So the Emperor asked him, describe this man to me. And the one complaining couldn't get himself to say anything but praise of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that he calls us to worship one God and one God alone, and he calls us to maintain family ties and to take care of the orphan and the needy and to assist those in distress and so on, right? And when someone came to the wife of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, Aisha, he asked her that what is the character of the Prophet, right? What is the character of the Prophet? She said his character was the Qur'an. كان خلقه القرآن, right? His very character was the Qur'an, meaning that every virtue that the Qur'an calls to, you see it manifest in its most beautiful and perfect form in the person of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And that's something that was acknowledged even by those who were at enmity with him, which is why after 2 decades of opposition, the Meccans, the people of his own hometown, eventually left their opposition and entered into faith, because they couldn't deny that he was an embodiment of those virtues that he came with. And this is why we as believers, every time we mention the name of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, we send blessings upon him, because we are thankful to God for giving us this exemplar. And what is the role of the Prophet? The role of the Prophet is defined in the 3rd chapter of the Qur'an in verse 164, that God tells us, لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ بَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, that God has indeed blessed the believers when he sent to them a messenger from amongst themselves. يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, reciting to them God's verses and purifying them. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and explaining to them the book and wisdom. وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ, though before this they were indeed in manifest confusion. And 4 functions are mentioned for the Prophet. The first of which are to recite to them God's verses, to convey to them divine revelation. And what is the purpose of divine revelation? What is the purpose of the Qur'an? It is to purify those who enter into faith. What is this purification, this tazkiyah? It is if you imagine water, right, that's all roiled up, it becomes murky. The act of purification of tazkiyah is to remove all dross and impurity, all those traits, inward and outward, that prevent one from seeking and attaining to and being realized in the good of this life and the good of the next. Right? It's to purify oneself so that one becomes pleasing to God. And how is that done? It is done through learning. And he explains to them, he teaches them the book, namely the Qur'an, wal hikmah, and the wisdom. And what is the wisdom? The wisdom, some scholars said it is wisdom in general. Others said no, wisdom here specifically is referring to the prophetic example, because wisdom is the capacity to act and respond in the right way given circumstances and considerations with an awareness of consequences. And this is what the prophetic example gives us, right? The prophetic example shows us how to act and respond in a way that is beautiful, that is excellent, that is restrained, that manifests all that is pleasing to God and all that facilitates for one to attain unto the good of this life and the next. So this is the function of the Prophet. So this is, a very brief introduction that we wanted to give about what the Qur'an is. Right? We understand the Qur'an to be divine revelation, a direct address of God to His creation by means of a book that we recite and that we strive to reflect upon and that we strive to follow. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was sent to convey this guidance and to show how one can be transformed through this guidance to becoming a thankful servant of God who is pleasing to God and who is pleased with God, who loves God and who is beloved by God. And he explained that guidance out through what we call the Sunnah, the prophetic example. And so these are some details we wanted to share very briefly in closing. We wanted to give a few recommended readings. The first is probably the best translation of the Qur'an is the one published by Oxford University Press, is by a distinguished Muslim scholar whose name is Muhammad Abdul Halim. So the translator's name is Muhammad Abdul Halim. It's easy to find. It's published by Oxford University Press. There's a paperback edition, like $7-8, and it's very good. There's also a hardback edition, and there's an edition that has the Arabic as well, but it's naturally rather larger. And Professor Abdul Halim is unique in that he is both a fully trained Islamic scholar and also an academic. He's a graduate of Islamic studies from Cambridge, so he has both a deep Islamic religious education and also a solid academic education, and the English in it is beautiful, and there's light but very helpful comments that clarify certain things. Now, from something rather serious, a book that is a good introduction to the Qur'an, and I'm quite serious about this, is the Qur'an for Dummies, right, by the Muslim chaplain at Princeton University, who's a capable Muslim scholar in his own right, Sohaib Sultan. And don't be turned off by the title. It's a very useful and accessible and clear introduction to the subject, and very serious about that. Also, we'd also recommend as an introduction to the Qur'an a work called The Story of the Qur'an, Its History and Place in Muslim Life by Dr. Ingrid Mattson, who is the president of the Islamic Society of North America, the largest representative body for Muslims in North America, and she's also the first female president of this organization. And so this is a very useful book, and it's very well written. It's published by Blackwell. So So her name is Dr. Ingrid Madsen. Now, in order to understand something about Islamic beliefs and what is being explained of those in the Qur'an, a classic primer or classic creed is the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, and this is translated by one of the leading Muslim scholars in North America, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who's the founder of Zaytuna College, which has been in the news recently. It's in its first year, and this is a very useful book. As for a good general introduction on Islam, we would recommend, there's many works. One of them is The Vision of Islam by Sachiko Murata and William Chittick, and this is a very thoughtful, rich introduction to Islam. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf actually has a CD set in which he explains this book. So this is something that we wanted to share with you. I hope you have benefit in it, and we pray that in the question and answer session, any questions that you have related to what we've presented or to the topic at hand can be addressed. And we'll close with the greeting of Islam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace, mercy and blessings of God be upon you. So from here in Toronto, have a great evening.